All right. I don't think this will necessarily take the whole time, so if we get done efficiently, we'll have a little bit of a break in between the two sessions. But this lecture is called The Art of Speaking Efficiently, and I'm going to start with a little bit of an extended excerpt from something, and I'll tell you what it is after I'm done reading. But kind of think about when this might be from as I'm reading it. Ours is the age of efficiency. Everywhere people are devising the most efficient methods of performing the operations of their callings. Business people seek the most efficient system of filing and bookkeeping. The manufacturer organizes their labor force and machinery so that every ounce of effort gives the greatest possible return in goods. The railroads are replacing steam with electric power, and surgeons spend many hours planning the best way to remove an appendix in the shortest time. Mechanical inventors speak of a machine as efficient when it does its work without loss of power. If 100 pounds of steam pressure are applied to it, the full 100 pounds are accounted for in valuable engine power. There is no waste. Any instrument is efficient when it gets the most work from a given amount of effort. When we attempt to apply the idea of efficiency to public speaking, we find that it is best expressed by the word effective. The two words, efficient and effective, have, to be sure, very much the same significance. Effective, however, throws the emphasis a little more upon the tangible result, upon the effect produced by any instrument. Now, speech is one of our most useful instruments. It is employed to carry messages from one mind to many others. If it carries the message truly and forcefully, it is effective. But if it loses part of the message or gives it in such a weak form that it does not impress the other mind at all, it is ineffective. Speech, then, is an instrument through which one mind works upon others. It ought to be made most effective. The reason that I really like this is that it's from a book called Effective Public Speaking that was written in the year 1919, so nearly 100 years ago. Frederick Robinson, who was a professor at the City College of New York, or what became the City College of New York, I think has provided the best explanation I have ever heard for the importance of public speaking and the importance of efficiency when speaking publicly. So, inefficiency, I think, is a scourge of competitive debate, competitive policy debate. In particular, my goal for this lecture is to explain the idea of efficiency, why efficiency is important, to provide a comprehensive review of the most common inefficiencies, and to hopefully empower you with some specific ways that you can improve your efficiency via targeted practice. So there are three parts to this if you're flowing along. The first is the value of efficiency. The value of efficiency. The second is the most common inefficiencies. The most common inefficiencies. And third are drills to improve your efficiency. Drills to improve your efficiency. So Roman numeral 1, the value of efficiency. Subpoint A is efficiency defined. So if you look up the word efficiency in a dictionary, so I picked Random House Dictionary, so it's easily accessible. The definition of efficiency is the state or quality of being efficient, competency in performance, accomplishment of or ability to accomplish a job with a minimum expenditure of time and effort, and the ratio of the work done or energy developed by a machine, engine, etc., to the energy supplied to it, usually expressed as a percentage. So that's what Robinson was talking about a moment ago. If you look up the word efficient, Random House says it's performing or functioning in the best possible manner with the least waste of time and effort. It's satisfactory and economical to use, or it's utilizing a particular commodity or product with the least waste of resources or effort. All of those definitions, I think, correspond well with what we mean when we say efficiency in debate. In debate, efficiency is effectively communicating the maximum amount of content within the confines of a timed speech. Effectively communicating the maximum amount of content within the confines of a timed speech. As Robinson explained almost 100 years ago, the goal of efficiency in a variety of sectors is to eliminate waste. And when applied to the context of debate, you want to eliminate all waste. Every utterance, every word, every moment of every speech, every cross-ax must be useful and it must contribute to victory. If it is not contributing to victory, it is waste, and you need to eliminate it. Subpoint B. Good speaking is good writing. Good speaking is good writing. So debate is obviously a speaking activity. Most of what we do in debate is speaking, but it's also a writing activity. And I think it's really important that debaters, when they're assessing their speaking, think about the text that underlies their speech. So in the same way that an efficiently worded essay is something that's demanded by your English teacher or that will give you a high grade in English class, an efficiently worded speech is demanded by your judges and will give you higher points and more wins in a debate. Obviously, a lot of your constructive speeches are written. They're written in advance. They're based on prepared materials. You carefully craft the 1AC. You carefully craft your 1NC shells, your front lines to the case. But the rebuttals are where the real writing occurs. To deliver a powerful rebuttal, students have to verbalize their arguments clearly and persuasively, but you have to do so extemporaneously or without a script. So in the early parts of the debate, your pre-round preparation, your blocks, your front lines, your shells, all of that requires good writing. So you want to write your 1AC well, you want to write your 1NC well, etc. But the rebuttals are where the real challenge comes, because you can't write the entire speech in advance. But you should still attempt to speak in a way that could be consistent with good writing. Good speaking, like good writing, must be clear, it must be concise, it must be well organized, so that the content that you are trying to communicate can shine through. By thinking about your speech as a text, as writing, debaters can more rigorously assess the content that they're trying to communicate in their speeches, and they can dramatically improve their efficiency and their language choices. Subpoint C, efficiency is a means to an end, not an end in itself. Efficiency is a means to an end, not an end in itself. So the purpose of efficiency is to facilitate more effective communication. So that's why Robinson says, when we say efficiency in public speaking, there's really no difference between efficiency and effectiveness. The goal is just to effectively communicate with the judge. The reason that we care about efficiently delivering our speeches is because efficiency allows us to maximize the amount of time that we are spending advancing our arguments and advancing our cause, which is to win the debate. Put another way, efficiency creates more room in your speeches for arguments or for content, enabling you to advance your arguments, make your arguments deeper, and to eliminate waste. By itself, efficiency does not make your arguments better. So a bad argument communicated more efficiently is still a bad argument. Efficiency by itself is not a panacea. Just by getting more efficient, you aren't going to make your content better. But you will provide yourself with more time to develop your content. And hopefully the goal is that by being more efficient, you can get deeper. The depth of your content can improve. One thing to note is that efficiency, and when we talk about being very efficient, we don't mean that that's an excuse to eliminate good communication skills or good communication practices. It doesn't mean just go as fast as possible. It doesn't mean just only use embedded clash and never signpost anything. It doesn't mean never slow down. It doesn't mean never make a connection. In fact, it's the opposite. And the goal of efficiency is the opposite. The goal of efficiency is to eliminate wastefulness such that debaters have more time to effectively communicate, more time to make important connections, and more time to develop their content in a way that is understandable by the judge. Roman numeral 2, the most common inefficiency. So I have divided these into 3 categories: speech structure, sentence structure, and word economy. Speech structure, sentence structure, and word economy. And for each one, there are several examples. So subpoint A is speech structure. What do I mean by speech structure? I mean that the way that you structure your speeches, the way that you organize your speeches, where you talk about what, how you talk about what, and in what place in the speech, has a dramatic impact on how efficient you are overall. In the same way that writing a 5-paragraph essay demands a particular structure, with an introduction and body paragraphs and a conclusion, a good debate speech demands a particular structure. And that structure depends on the speech, and it's not as simple as the 5-paragraph essay. But the mistakes that you make in structuring your speech devastate your efficiency. The goal in this area is to eliminate unnecessary transitions and to use clear and concise labels. So what are some examples of common inefficiencies in this area? The first one, long introductions. I call this narrating the debate. So for example, I have 3 answers. My first argument will be that the counterplan solves this warrant. Or, first of all, we meet their interpretation. Substructure is good. Numbering is good. It makes it easier to flow. It can make you more efficient. But when you use it as filler to extend introductions to arguments or to pad the space between arguments, it's just a waste of speech time, and it's annoying. Instead of saying, I have 3 answers, my first argument will be that the counterplan solves this warrant, say, first, the counterplan solves whatever the argument. Or 1, the counterplan solves whatever the argument. Instead of saying, first of all, we meet their interpretation, say, 1, we meet. That does not mean that numbering is bad. Obviously, in both of those examples, I've used a number in the more efficient version. But a lot of debaters struggle with long introductions, with narrating what they're about to do, previewing what they're about to do instead of just doing it. Number 2, go to the whatever debate and the related drop down to the whatever debate, or drop down to whatever. So a debater is chugging along and then they're like, drop down to the solvency debate, or now go to the permutation debate. Signposting is good. So signposting is communicating to the judge what you're talking about or what argument you're responding to. That's very good. Over-narrating what you're doing or saying what you're doing before you do it is a total waste of time. And in particular, visual directions are unnecessary, inefficient, and silly. So there is no down and up. There is no go over to, and you don't need to provide Google Map instructions. If you start talking about the permutation, or you say, they say, and then answer something that has to do with permutation, the judge will know that you are now talking about the permutation. A lot of times what happens with this is someone will say something like, now go to the permutation debate, extend the permutation. The permutation should be the best option in the debate because it's the permutation which demonstrates the permutation is not linked to the net benefit because the permutation solves. So now group the next no link argument or whatever. You have said nothing, right? You have told the judge that you're going to go to the permutation. You have said the word permutation several times, but you haven't really communicated an argument. So eliminate visual directions and eliminate moment-by-moment narration. You should not, the judge should not feel like Siri is letting the judge know what the student is doing in their speech. There's no need for that. Number 3, I really don't like this one. Extend across. Extend across. So, extend across 2AC1, we meet. They have cold conceded our impact. Extend across that economic decline causes war. This is another visual direction that adds absolutely nothing to a speech. And it's very pervasive. A lot of people use this. I don't know why. Obviously, the first step and a helpful step would be to just eliminate the word across, because I don't know where we're crossing or where we came from and where we're going. There's no bridge involved, I don't believe. There's no street to cross. I don't know what that means. I don't know why that is there. But even the word extend is unnecessary. Instead of just saying, like, judge, extend 2AC number 1, you could just make the argument contained in 2AC number 1. And by making the argument, you're extending the argument. Extension is a description of an argument, or a description of something that happened. Saying the description of something that happened before it happens does not do the action. So saying extend something doesn't extend something. So if you're like, extend we meet, and that's all you say, you haven't said anything. So it's a waste of time. And if you do say something and explain the we meet argument, then saying extend doesn't matter because you've already extended it. So no extend, certainly no extend across or extend over. Number 4, convoluted labels, or lacks of labels, maybe, the absence of labels. So a lot of times students try to make smart arguments. This happens a lot when making evidence comparison arguments or impact comparison arguments. You have some smart argument that you would like to communicate. So for example, our evidence is from a professor in the field, whereas their evidence is from a journalist without academic credentials and so doesn't understand the specialized issues involved in Cuban politics. Okay. Good luck flowing that if you're a judge. It's an okay distinction, right? You tried to make a distinction between two authors. You tried to warrant that. That's a good effort. But there is no way that the judge could write that down because the judge has no idea what word to write down. So instead of that, prefer academic credentials to journalism, important for analyzing Cuban politics. I've communicated the same argument in approximately 40% of the words, and I've done so in a way that the judge is likely to write down the words academic credentials. If the judge writes down the words academic credentials, or even ac cred or something, the judge is very likely to remember in subsequent speeches or after the debate that I have communicated an argument about the qualifications or the credibility of my evidence. Judges need to be able to flow arguments, to write them down or to type them, not just to hear them. So your job is to front load your arguments with clear, concise, flowable labels so that the judge may write down your awesome content. And number 5, and related, is the illusion of depth. The illusion of depth. Beginning students have a hard time talking enough about important issues in the debate. So when you're a beginning student, you're like, wow, I don't know how to fill up all of this time. The speech times are so long, especially the rebuttals. Like, how could I possibly give a 5-minute 2NR about this? How could I possibly give a 5-minute 2NR about this? The next stage, students start to understand that on important parts of the debate, it's important to spend a lot more time. And so you want to invest time in that part of the flow. Some people call it sitting on that, or putting a lot of ink there. Whatever. We have a lot of weird ways to express the idea that on important issues, students should spend more time explaining their argument. Unfortunately, a lot of students take from that just talking more about an argument, so time spent talking about that argument, is time invested in making that argument better, when many times it's just a shield that hides the fact that you haven't really said anything. So, you know that it's important to talk about the importance of political capital to immigration reform in your 2NR. And you know that that's like something the affirmative talked a lot about in the 1AR, and this is likely to be something that the 2AR talks about. So your instinct, or you kind of learned that, okay, I need to spend time there, I need to sit on political capital key. And so you say something like, extend across that political capital is key. Our evidence indicates that political capital is necessary for agenda passage, because without political capital there can be no agenda passage, and it's especially true in the situation of immigration reform, which depends on political capital, because without political capital there can be no immigration reform. Extend our evidence. And you think to yourself, spend some time on political capital key, but you have said nothing. You have said not a thing. At best you have referenced authors of evidence, but you have not made an argument. Inefficiencies often supplement this illusion of depth because they make it easier for you to say a lot of words without saying any arguments, or say a lot of words without saying anything meaningful, without advancing the debate. So a lot of the subsequent sections about sentence structure and word choice manifest themselves as enablers of the illusion of depth. So we will return to that briefly, but the illusion of depth is not an inefficiency in and of itself, but it is an inefficiency produced outcome. Subpoint B, sentence structure. The structure of your overall speech is obviously super important. The narrating and the turn-by-turn directions and the Siri-esque notifications are very annoying, and they distract from the content of your speech. But perhaps even more important is the way that you structure individual sentences within your speech. Your goals when constructing sentences in debate should be to use active voice, not passive voice, and to keep sentences as simple as possible. It is hilarious to me, to be honest, some of the sentence constructions that students in debate come up with. and some of the perversions of the English language that we say every debate. So I think a lot of you are going to feel personally connected to this list, even if you were not totally connected to the previous list. Number one, and the worst thing that any student does in any speech, which means that. Which means that. This is the most powerful and stupid enabler of passive voice and passive constructions that we do in debate. It connects two statements, and instead of wording those two statements clearly and efficiently, it mutates them into hybrid sentences that are impossible to flow, very confusing, and that take forever to express. So for example, the United States has a strong military and the world's largest economy, which means that hegemony is resilient and sustainable. Okay, well, what are you trying to say? You're trying to say that hegemony is resilient and sustainable. That's what you're trying to communicate to the judge. And the reason for that is that the United States has a strong military and the world's largest economy. Reasonable argument. How about hegemony is resilient and sustainable because the U.S. has a strong military and the world's largest economy? Simpler. Starting with the argument, no weird sentence structure, no weird padding in the middle of the sentence, no distraction, just a simple sentence that expresses your argument. How about this one? Predictability is the biggest internal link to limits, which means that our interpretation solves limits better. That seems really confusing to express a really simple argument. Predictability is the biggest internal link to limits, which means that our interpretation solves limits better. Our interpretation is more limited because it's most predictable. That's easier, isn't it? Argument, warrant. No strange connections, no reversing the order, no unflowable weirdness. If you could eliminate all of the sentence constructions which begin with something and then connect to something else using the language of which means that, you would instantly gain a dramatic amount of speech time, functional speech time, in all of your rebuttal speeches. I hate that. Number two, close second. Reason as to why. Reason as to why. I would dare to guess that when you all are hanging out at Epicurean, or you're hanging out in the dorm, or whatever, that reason as to why is not regularly dropped into your conversations. I don't think that when you were discussing which elective or which mandatory fund to go to, someone was like, the reason as to why I would like to go to the White House movie is because blah, 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 blah. I don't think anyone said that. But in debate, you say that all the time. You say things like, there's no reason as to why the alternative solves the case. There's no reason as to why the alternative solves the case. Interesting. I mean, obviously the most simple change could just be there's no reason the alternative solves the case. You don't have to say as to why. But even better, why don't you just say the alternative doesn't solve the case? I have no idea, but you don't. The weird turning a simple positive sentence into a negative, like double negative sentence, there's no evidence that it's not, or whatever, who knows what that's coming from. How about, our interpretation captures all the reasons as to why their interpretation solves limits. Right now you're all like, that sounds silly. But you say that all the time. Our interpretation captures all the reasons as to why their interpretation solves limits. How about our interpretation solves limits? That would be easier, wouldn't it? Be clearer, takes less time, less confusing, easier to flow, have more time to explain why, instead of saying as to why. So whenever possible, and it is always possible, speak clearly in an active voice, say what you mean directly, instead of trying to dance around it with strange sentence construction. Numero 3. In the running for most hated. Only third. The fact that. the fact that. Again, I would guess that when discussing mandatory fun options, no one said the fact that this movie is about zombies is a reason as to why we shouldn't go to it, which means that we should go to this other one, which is a reason as to why we shouldn't go to the first one. You don't talk like that. So for example, the fact that our interpretation gives them ground means you should err af on reasonability. Or, the fact that economic collapse causes war means our impact outweighs. So, let's do the second one. The fact that our interpretation gives them ground means you should err af on reasonability. What in the world are we trying to say there? It's very confusing, it's unclear. I think it's probably something simple. What about our interpretation gives them ground, err af on reasonability? That wouldn't be bad. Or how about err af on reasonability because our interpretation gives them ground? Simple. I understand both of those sentences. I do not understand the fact that our interpretation gives them ground means you should err af on reasonability. I don't understand that. And I don't understand even when I'm reading it, much less hearing it delivered in the midst of a high-speed speech in the middle of a row. Or how about the fact that economic collapse causes war means our impact outweighs? Not even totally sure what argument is trying to be communicated there. Perhaps economic collapse causes war, or our impact outweighs economic collapse causes war. But the construction that begins with the fact that makes it totally unclear what you're trying to say. No need for the fact that. What all of these constructions, and there are a few more, but I want to stop here, pause here for a moment. The reason that all of these constructions exist is twofold. First, debating quickly is difficult because you have to think really fast. And you have to connect what you're thinking to what you're saying. So your brain has to think real fast, and then it has to tell your mouth what to say, and then your mouth has to say it real fast. And so in their zeal to speak faster, debaters start adding filler words. They start complicating their sentences, so they have more time to think about what they're going to say. But they don't want to just slow down so that they can speak at the speed that their brain is going. They want to go faster than they can think. And this creates the illusion that you're going fast. So there's a lot of debaters. I don't want to use any examples. But students in our lab over the last few years, some of the best debaters in the country, at the beginning of the summer, everyone's like, wow, they're so fast. You listen to their speech, and you're like, wow, really fast. So think to yourself, think of someone who you think is a really fast debater, someone who speaks really quickly. Sometimes that's an illusion, because what they're really doing is they're saying a lot of words, but their words are hiding the lack of content. We're going to talk about how to expose that. But that's the first reason that all of these constructions appeal to debaters initially. The second reason is that you all just model other debaters. So these terrible bad habits become habits of relatively good debaters or even really good debaters. And then younger debaters just do what they've seen those debaters do. And so you, all of a sudden, a young debater who's trying to get better at debate, without anyone telling them to, or without having any reason to, they're starting to say the fact that, the reason that, as to why, which means that, all of this garbage. And I will suggest that if you get better at this, you can get better than those people that are highly inefficient, and you can help end the scourge of all of this by setting a good example for other people. Sidebar over. Number 4. Default to, and its cousin in crime, defer to. Which might, I don't know which ones. They're both. This phrasing makes very little sense to me. I don't regularly default to anything in everyday conversation. I very rarely defer to anything. Think about this. So, has anyone ever heard someone say, I don't really like coffee, so I'll default to having some orange juice? You ever heard someone say that? I don't really like movies, so I'll defer to playing basketball. No one says that. No one ever. Only debaters. So debaters will say stuff like, the fact that our interpretation solves back their offense probably means you should default to it. I have no idea what that means. But you say it all the time, and you say it powerfully, and you think that you've said something. The fact that our interpretation solves back their offense, those are some ones we'll get to in a minute. Probably. We'll get to that one too. means you should default to it. All that is attempting to say, without saying anything at all, is that we have a better interpretation. But it doesn't say why we have a better interpretation. It hasn't made an argument or expressed an intelligent thought at all. It's just a blustery storm of words. How about the fact that they have no offense means you should defer to our DA? What the heck does that mean? Defer to the DA? Like, the dissent outweighs the case? That's what they're saying? Why does the DA win because you have no offense? That doesn't make any sense. These two tend to create really stupid constructions of inefficient sentences. And their partners in crime tend to be probably and the fact that. So when you witness a default to crime, you're likely to see a probably crime and a the fact that crime. There's a crime spree in there. Number 5. Just want to see. Actually going to be able to. That's hard for me to even say. Actually going to be able to. And its shorter version, just the word actually. Ugh. How about this one? They're not actually going to be able to solve for the economy because nuclear war collapses trade. They're not actually going to be able to solve for the economy because nuclear war collapses trade. Why can't you just say nuclear war undermines the economy because it collapses trade? That's all you're saying. How about the disad actually turns the case because economic decline makes war more likely? What function does the word actually play there? What are you saying? Like, you're contrasting it to the disad fictionally turns the case or pretends to turn the case? I have no idea. It's just a word that debaters started saying, which means nothing. Obviously, anytime you say the disad turns the case, you mean the disad will actually turn the case. You're not saying the disad will not turn the case. And it goes along with its friend, probably. We'll talk about it in a minute. But the difference between actually, which is just a word choice thing, so it could have gone under the C sub1, and actually going to be able to, is actually going to be able to takes the idiocy of actually and manifests itself into a giant phrase that connects sentences weirdly. So it helps facilitate, which means that. It helps facilitate the fact that and all of those garbage constructions. Get rid of that. So bad. Number 6. For me, this is the least annoying, but it is very inefficient. Our evidence indicates that. Our evidence indicates that. So for example, our royal evidence indicates that economic decline increases the risk of war. Instead of our royal evidence indicates, say economic decline increases the risk of war, that's royal. There are 2 benefits to this. Benefit numero uno. Actually, I guess there's 3 benefits. I just thought of a third one. Benefit numero uno. It means that the first thing the judge hears is the argument, not the citation. All judges care about the argument. Many judges care about the citation. But all judges who understand the argument are willing to allow the evidence, even if they didn't write it on their flow, if they remember that you were citing evidence throughout the course of the speech. So by saying economic decline increases the risk of war at the beginning of your argument, instead of our royal evidence indicates that, you get the judge to write down something about economic decline and war and not just the word royal. Second, it's shorter. It's less syllables. It's just less time. And third, it better facilitates evidence comparison because you can say the argument, then the citation, and then why that piece of evidence is superior to whatever evidence they have read. The other version tends to create run-on sentences or long paragraphs like the thing I tried to do at the beginning when I compared the 2 pieces of evidence based on credentials, where there just becomes like kind of a run-on sentence that's unflowable. So lots of benefits. This one's super easy. You should all fix that. I would call it verbally footnoting your arguments. make the argument, footnote, royal. Subpoint C, word economy. Word economy. So we've talked about the structure of your speech overall, and we've talked about the way that you structure sentences. But even fixing those two things, debaters still struggle with filler language and just totally meaningless jargon, unnecessarily complicated word choices, waste. In this area, the goal is to minimize jargon, eliminate filler language, and simplify phrases. So in the same way that the sentence mishmashes and weirdness is a product of trying to buy yourself time to think, most of these are too, but they've become horribly and sadly and depressingly cemented as part of the debate culture. And you need to get rid of that. Number one, in the round or in the debate. Yes, genius, this is a debate round. No, genius, the judge doesn't need to be reminded that this is a debate round. We access the biggest impact in the round. Nuclear war causes extinction. Or they have no offense in the debate. Any risk of our impact outweighs. Do you really need to tell the judge that when you're talking about the biggest impact, you're talking about in the round, like not somewhere else? What are you clarifying? They're like, we have the biggest impact, but only in this round. In other rounds, we had a different impact, which was smaller. Is that what you're trying to communicate to the judge? I have no idea what you're trying to communicate to the judge. They have no offense in the debate, but they do have offense outside of the debate. They have offense like at the movies. They have offense at the movies, but none in the debate. Any risk of our impact outweighs in the debate. But in other venues, it does not outweigh, which is why I'm specifying the debate. Also, remember, you're in a debate. And you're a debate judge. Judging a debate, a round of debate. In the debate. Garbage, just total garbage. There's a related one which is on the flow, which just makes you sound really backwards, and I don't know what you're saying. They have no offense on the flow. Any risk of our impact outweighs. So there's no ink on the flow. They cold conceded, blah, 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 garbage. Everything is on the flow. What are you talking about? They don't have any offense on the flow, but off the flow, they said some awesome stuff which didn't get flowed. But on the flow, no offense. So if we're looking at the flow, no offense, but outside the flow, offense. In the debate round, in the round, judge of debate. Okay, thanks for that, helpful debater. Garbage. Number two. Oh, man, these make me so frustrated. Right now, or in the status quo. You do this all the time. All the time. This one should have been number one. This one might even make me more mad. I'm more mad right now than I was for number one. Poverty is not being solved right now. China is not pursuing space weapons in the status quo. Right. If poverty is not being solved, presumably you mean right now. China's not developing space weapons, presumably you mean in the status quo, unless you're talking about like some virtual reality that is not the status quo. These phrases try to make something explicit, which is implicit and already understood. Poverty not being solved implies that poverty is not being solved right now. China not pursuing space weapons implies that China is not pursuing space weapons now. The only time that you would add a modifier is if that modifier meant something. So China's not pursuing space weapons in the next 10 years. Or poverty is not being solved in the next decade or something like that. I guess that was the same. In the next 2 decades. But there is never a reason to say in the status quo and right now, because those are implied by your arguments about the status quo. Very simple. Number 3. Ooh, this one. Solve back. And it's heinous cousins. Check back, link back, turn back, lose back. I think you should automatically lose back if you use any of this language. We solve back their economy impact. Our interpretation checks back their limits offense. What in the world are you saying? Do you listen to yourselves? What does solve back even mean? Is that like differentiated from solve forward? Do you sometimes have to solve forward for their impact? Do you sometimes have to limit forward their limits or whatever? What? Everyone says this. I have no idea where this comes from. I would, again, I'm really putting myself out there, I'm really risking a lot here, suggest that in your day-to-day conversations, you don't use the word back after every verb. So, I'm going to go play back some basketball. I'm going to go eat back some lunch. Got a little hungry. I plan to eat back, my plan to eat lunch, eats back your counterplan for dinner. What? No. What? So I don't know why anyone says these things. Turn back. What? Number 4. Things like, and it's almost identical twin, things such as. These tend to be hilarious. The DA turns the case. It accesses things like war and the economy. Capitalism makes things such as environmental destruction and global warming inevitable. Why do you need those words? It accesses things like war? The DA turns the case. War. Or better yet, just explain your argument. Capitalism makes things such as environmental destruction and global warming inevitable? Capitalism makes environmental destruction and warming inevitable. Isn't that easier? Why do you want to say things like? My favorite, and this, I love it, is when people say things like, and then they only say one thing. Like, our economy advantage accesses impacts like the economy. Topicality, our interpretation solves things such as limits. What else does it solve? Well, things such as limits. So it just solves limits? Well, things such as limits. What are the other things? Limits and things such as limits. I don't know. I don't know why you do that. I don't like that one. Number 5, you love this word. Probably. This one's recent, so I don't remember this one being real bad. I think part of it is this one might be one of the few that you actually say all the time, like in daily conversation. I know I use the word probably sometimes when it doesn't make any sense to do that. I probably do. Probably use that word probably. So you say stuff like, the DA probably turns the case because economic decline causes war. Probably? Okay. Our link turn probably outweighs the link because it's more specific to the plan. If your intended meaning is like almost certainly, you don't need to say probably because you're kind of implying that by going for the argument or explaining the argument. If your intended meaning is something else, then it's just meaningless filler. And in a lot of times, your reason for using the word probably is because you don't actually have an argument. So you're like, our Russia war advantage probably turns oil spills. The Russia war disadvantage probably turns oil spills. And then you're asked like, how? Well, probably does. Well, why? Well, probably causes more oil spills. Okay, well, how does it cause more oil spills? I don't know, probably does. The counterplan probably solves the case. Well, how does it solve advantage 2? Probably does. Why doesn't it? You got no reason as to why it doesn't. Probably does. Get rid of probably. Don't use that one. Number 6. Literally, which is the worst word in the world, and its cousin, entirety. The DA turns the entirety of the economy advantage. This takes out the entirety of the case. Nuclear war literally turns the entirety of the case. These are totally meaningless. And their only purpose is to facilitate hyperbolic claims. Literally means like actually. It actually happens. So this is really no different than saying actually, but it's even more annoying. You don't mean the DA literally turns the case. Like, I don't even know what that would mean. You mean that when evaluating whether to do the plan or not, the judge should consider the disadvantage. Because if the disadvantage is true and that sequence of events occurs, you could mess with the case. Reasonable argument. Literally turns the advantage doesn't make any sense. And the word entirety just facilitates overly broad claims. They don't solve the entirety of their case. The entirety of our impact was conceded, which means the entirety of our disad outweighs their case, and it turns the entirety of their case entirely. Those are just excuses not to make actual arguments. It's just grandstanding. And grandstanding is a waste against teams that fill their speeches with content instead of garbage. Number 7, on this question. I have no idea where this one came from. I guess it came from cross-ex. And it has transformed from what might have actually started as something about questions that were asked in cross-ex to transform anything into the debate into a question. Our evidence is surprisingly good on the question of the link. Did someone ask a question about the link? Was there a question expressed? I don't remember asking a question about the link. I don't think the affirmative expressed a question. I think the affirmative said that there was no link. So your job is not to answer the question of whether there's a link, it's to beat their no link argument. The one that everyone loves, and this is so stupid. Cross-ex was totally embarrassing on this question, it's game over. Almost every time I've ever heard that, cross-ex was not embarrassing. And it was not a question. It's like a thread in the cross-ex about a certain argument. And when you use this phrasing, you just conceal that you're saying nothing, or you attempt to. It's not really concealing anything. Everyone gets that you're not saying anything. Our evidence is surprisingly good on this question means nothing. Like, should I have expected that your evidence sucked? Should I expect that you had horrible evidence and I will be pleasantly surprised? If so, just give me the evidence. Just make the argument and let me be surprised. Don't ruin my surprise. And in reality, all you're saying is like, our cards are good for no specified reason. I'm not telling you why they're good. I'm just going to share that I was very surprised at the quality of the evidence, in my opinion. I was looking at our evidence, and I was like, our evidence is going to suck, and then it was good. So I'm just letting you know how I felt emotionally at the time that I read my evidence, Judge, in the debate. At the point there, you're right. Just don't ever say that. I can't think of any reason why I would ever say the word on this question. Unless someone asked me a question, I said, well, on this question, well, look, then. Number 8. Always going to win / never going to win. What are you talking about? All future debates? The poor affirmative team will never win another debate? They're never going to win a debate. Or you're always going to, you're done losing forever? We're always going to win that the economy is strong now. Okay, is that true in like 10 years? 30 years? What are you talking about? They're never going to win a link term because we control uniqueness. Never? Like, okay. Do you care? Why aren't you just talking about this debate? Why do we have to talk about all future debates? It's really good to debate about possible ballots. So it's really good to say, even if they win X, we win Y. And Y is more important than X. That's awesome. It's classic framework, good rebuttals. That's how you do it. That's great. But when you add the word always, you're just kind of boasting, I guess, for no reason. You sort of sound like a clown, so it's like sort of funny boasting. But it also just means that you have a really unrealistic understanding of what's likely to happen in the debate. You're unrealistically assessing the debate. If you really think that there is no conceivable chance for the rest of history that the affirmative team's argument could persuade the judge, then good luck answering it in a way that reflects the judge's realistic assessment of their argument. The key to effective rebuttals is realistic assessment. It's being realistic about what they're likely to win, what you're likely to win, how the judge is likely to assess your arguments. Like several of the other ones, this absurd hyperbole, and I hope everyone knows what hyperbole means. It means exaggeration, over-the-topness. Is silly and wasteful and should be eliminated from their speeches. Number 9. In a world, or at the point when, the economy will never be able to survive in a world of nuclear war. Okay. In a world where we win uniqueness, there's only a risk of a link. In a world where you win uniqueness? Are we watching Fringe and switching worlds? I'm not sure what that means. At the point where we win uniqueness, there's only a risk of a link. I just said 3 sentences, all of which you would love to put in your rebuttals. I hear you say that kind of stuff in your rebuttals all the time. And I have not said a single thing. I have not said anything that explains my arguments, their arguments, why my arguments are better than their arguments, why the judge should vote for me. Instead of saying the economy will never be able to survive in a world of nuclear war, just say the economy won't survive nuclear war, or better yet, the simplest version, nuclear war will destroy the economy. Isn't that easier? If you think if you're a judge and a student is kind of foaming at the mouth and going real fast, and they're like, in a world where nuclear war happens, there can't be an economy because nuclear war will kill the economy at the point where it happens and it's a nuclear war. Whatever, Facebook. If you say nuclear war will devastate the economy, okay, why? And say why. And why does that matter? And say why it matters. And in the time that this other student spent just like weirdly boasting and constructing worlds and talking about the points when and all of the times that they're going to win and lose and whatever, you have actually not just said a claim, but you've said the claim and the warning, you've impacted the argument. Goodness. I wouldn't want to debate someone like that. That would make it really hard for me to always win. Roman numeral 3. So there are others. It's not a comprehensive list. If any of you have ideas when we're done with this, or ones that I'm missing, feel free to suggest them. But Roman numeral 3 is drills to improve efficiency. Drills to improve efficiency. So I have described a heinous situation of horrible speaking and wasted speech time and garbage sentence constructions and terrible writing and confusion and lack of clarity, and it's terrible. It's awful, and I agree with all of those things. It is that bad. You all have no idea how bad it is. Most of us have just learned to accept it. I refuse to accept it. But there are ways to fix it. But I will warn you that the ways to fix it are hard. The garbage is easy. It's very easy to waste speech time. It's very easy to say all these garbage sentence constructions. It's very easy to construct run-on sentences and weird passive voice sentences and all these strange structures. That is very easy. It is very hard to train yourself to be disciplined and efficient when speaking. But if you do so, it has enormous benefits. 2 exercises. Subpoint A is transcription. Transcription. This is the most tedious drill I do with any student, but it is also by far the most effective thing I do to teach debate. I encourage you to do it several times if you have efficiency issues, or even if you don't, just to make sure, because you do. Several times at the beginning of the process. And then to follow up and do it periodically over the course of the season to make sure there's not any new issues that are cropping up, to make sure that you're reinforcing good habits, to make sure that you haven't lapsed back into garbage. Here's how you do it. Number 1, you obtain a recording. Obviously, you need a video or an audio recording of speeches in order to complete this activity. That's like the barrier to entry. But unlike a few years ago, that's become remarkably easy. Everyone has a camera, it seems like. Everyone has the ability to record on their iPhone or on their laptop or on their iPad or whatever. And if you do not have that capability, it is the cheapest version of this is just to get like a handheld digital recorder for like 20 bucks. Video, I find, is more useful in almost all circumstances, but not really for this exercise. So if you have the ability to do video, that's also useful for doing other assessments of your speaking, but audio works fine here. The best speeches to transcribe are 1 ARs, 2 NRs, and 2 ARs. Although there are also parts of other speeches that can be usefully transcribed. So 2 ACs on the case, 2 NCs on the case or on counterpoint explanations. Basically stuff that's not just blocks that you are reading verbatim. From verbatim, coincidentally. You can transcribe original speeches, so like the first time you do it in a debate or in a practice round or whatever, or you can do reworked speeches, so speeches that you've worked on. But especially when you first start doing this, I guess really always, that was an unnecessary caveat. You should choose speeches that are representative of your debating. So you don't want to choose the speech that's like the worst speech that you've given in terms of efficiency. You don't want to choose one that you've overly prepped and like made it pretty good so that it doesn't have efficiency problems. That's much less useful than kind of original, raw, this is how you sound in most of your debates kind of speeches. Number 2, review common inefficiencies. Helpfully, I have just provided them to you. And I've also provided you with a description of what you're trying to eliminate so that you can identify other filler language, distracting sentence structures, imprecise word choices, etc., etc. But right before you do this activity, you should always look at that and familiarize yourself with what you are likely to encounter and what is likely to be terrible. Number 3, this is the hard part, transcribe your speech. I found that this is easiest with headphones. Good headphones that can kind of be loud enough that can block out some noise, or do headphones in a quiet place. What you do is you open up a text document and you open up the video or the audio. And starting from the beginning of the speech, you transcribe everything that you said during the speech, including all of the filler and the repetitions and the ums and the ahs and the stuttering and all of that. At first it might take a little bit longer, but once you kind of get the hang of it, I have found that transcription takes approximately 5 minutes for every 1 minute of speech time, assuming that you are about average in terms of listening speed and typing speed. So a 5-minute speech would take, 5 times 5 is 25 minutes. 8-minute speech would take whatever. When you have finished with the transcription, the kind of first draft, and what ends up happening as you do that is you like play it for a little bit and try and type, and then you fall behind, so you have to stop, move it back, do it again, move it back, do it again. You do that for the whole speech. Once you're done with the whole thing, listen to the whole thing again from the beginning, editing your transcript to make sure that you caught everything. If you are doing this with someone else, have someone else do the proofreading, because what I have found, and this is weird, but predictable, and I should have known this, some of you have just internalized these weird constructions or these phrases so much that you don't even notice them anymore. So like if I said taco between every taco word that I'd say during my taco lecture and I didn't know that I was saying taco, right? That would be really weird. That happens to you sometimes. You like start saying words like probably, or you don't even notice it. It's just so much part of your vocabulary. Number 4, edit your speech. So in a Word document or whatever, copy and paste the entire text of the speech so that you have the original transcript. So don't delete the original. You got to keep that one and keep it as comparison. So like, use the verbatim. Block header 1 is like original speech. Block header 2 is better speech. And go through the speech and edit it and fix all of the garbage. The first thing that I encourage you to do is kind of break it up into somewhat like paragraphs or whatever. So a lot of times it's hard to know even where to do that, but this giant wall of text can be really intimidating. It makes it hard to do. So break it up, add some white space. And then your goal should be to use active voice. So change every passive voice sentence structure in your whole speech to active voice. Keep sentences as simple as possible. Eliminate extraneous jargon. Eliminate unnecessary or lengthy transitions. And use clear and concise labels for all of your arguments. 5 things. Number 5. Use your edited speech to improve. I have found that just purely the act of transcription is immensely valuable in and of itself, because it forces you to do something you don't normally do, which is to carefully, not just listen to yourself, but carefully listen to yourself and carefully critique your speech. It exposes your inefficiencies, and it gives you a model for how to do a better speech after you've done the editing. So that's all useful in and of itself. But I think there are even ways to make this activity better. And given how much time it takes, you want that. Not sure what to, I guess we'll call these things little a. Little a, collaborate with an instructor to review your edits. So during the summer, a lab leader, during the season, a coach or an older debater or a teammate, an alum. The way to do this is you have to email the full text of the garbage speech, so the first speech, and then also the edited version, so they can compare the two, and they can comment on the edits that you made. And a lot of times they'll have suggestions on how to make it even better. So when I've done this in the past, some students kind of get it right away. Some students, they like get halfway there and then they need another edit, like a second edit, to get all the way to efficient. Because sometimes the starting point is just so terribly inefficient. There was one student who was really, really good and got top speaker at several big national tournaments a couple of years ago. And when we did this with him, he did a 1AR, 5-minute 1AR, and he was very fast. And when we finished the edit, he had 42 seconds of content out of 5 minutes. 42 seconds of content. And we were very harsh on him because he needed to work on that. But we got his speech down to 42 seconds out of 5 minutes. He said 42 seconds worth of actual thing, speech. He spent 4.5 minutes or whatever on just garbage. Weird structures, repetition, all of that. So sometimes it takes multiple edits is the point. Little b, practice delivering your edited speech, your edited version. This is really good for students who have trouble with speaking stuff, and especially when there's an intersection of inefficiencies plus speaking problems. When you have a clear and efficient script, you can isolate that variable. So just like you were doing a science experiment, now you can really focus on what is it that you mess up when you're speaking? What is it about your speaking that is messed up or that is less than perfect? A lot of students who people say are like unclear, who have speaking problems, when they speak an edited speech, they sound fine. People are like, oh, you sound so much better. Because it's not really a delivery problem, it's a speech structure problem. No one can speak in these convoluted, weird sentence structures and add all this filler language and sound clear. Because a lot of times clarity is not just can the judge hear the words you're saying, it's can the judge understand those words, do those words make sense, and can the judge write them down and remember them. So practice delivery. Little c, add content to the speech. So this is the first thing that's really hard and noticeable when you do this. All of a sudden you have a giant chunk of time left. And you're not used to constructing 5-minute rebuttals. You all are used to constructing about 3-minute rebuttals or 2-minute rebuttals, because that's functionally how much talking you do about warrants and actual arguments. The rest of it is just filler. So it can be really difficult to figure out what to do with all of that usable speech time. It's incredible. So this is a great way to kind of figure out, do I really know my AF? Do I really know this counterplan? Do I really know this dissag? Or am I just kind of, I know enough to fill up 2 minutes and then I can make the rest of the speech so inefficient that that fills the speech? It sounds like I know what I'm talking about, but I don't really know. Illusion of depth. Little d, make a list of the most prominent corrections. So everyone should have on their desktop or on, next to their, in their debate room at school or next to their locker or somewhere, wherever you will see it often. You should have the inefficiencies that you're working on at the time that are most prominent, and you should always keep those in mind when you're practicing. Almost all of these inefficiencies are just bad habits, and so the only way to fix them is to eliminate them and break the habit, which is hard. So the more that you can think about them and kind of make peace with the fact that you need to get rid of this, whatever it is, which means that as to why, probably whatever, the better. Little whatever is next. Critique your content. Critique your content. So some people, even efficient students, when you don't have a ton of efficiency improvements to make, can still use these transcripts to helpfully decide how they're framing content arguments, the way that they're ordering their arguments, the way that they're extending evidence, which evidence they're extending. A lot of times you'll have the idea in your head, it's like, all right, I have to go for this argument against the dissad, this big dissad against our case, I got to go for this argument, this is kind of what we go for. Transcribing and seeing what it looks like as a text can help you better write that part of the speech so that it's better, not just from an efficiency perspective, but also from a content perspective. This is kind of making the transcription drill and making it even more useful. And then the last little subpoint, and this one is super useful, not just in this drill, but in all things, is to flow yourself. So flow the video of your speech and assess how flowable you are. So one thing that can happen is you can make a lot of efficiency improvements, but you haven't gotten the last part down, which is that you need to be flowable. You can't just be hyper efficient. That efficiency has to contribute toward better flowability, contribute to the judge getting more down. So listen to yourself, flow yourself, and see what words you get down. Have another person flow you and see what words they get down, and then compare. Are those the words you want the judge to get down? Are you getting down different words? What can you do to make sure that that neutral judge, who's not you, is getting down the words and the phrases and the arguments that you want them to get down? That's transcription. Subpoint B, and the last one, is start and stop. This is a little bit easier, but it's a little bit less useful. So I think that you kind of need to do both. But this one's good, and this one's useful. Before we figured out that transcription works so well, this is what we did more often. So what this means is you do speech reworks. And I call them reworks, not redos, because redoing a speech that was bad is not useful. You need to work on that speech and then give it again. You do a speech rework with an instructor or a peer, and they stop you every time you do one of the things that you're trying to not do. So they stop you every time you use inefficient language or that you say something, a word choice that you want to eliminate. This takes a lot less time than transcription, but you can only focus on one or two things at a time. I think it has two purposes. The first purpose is habit correction. Like I said before, most of these inefficiencies are just bad habits. It's not that you actually think like this, it's just that you have been ingrained to think like that or to say things like that. And the start-stop drill can get kind of brutal. And so it can kind of just like shock you out of doing the bad habit that you've been doing or that you have formed. And number two is maintenance. Because over time, even students that have made a lot of progress in efficiency will notice that inefficiencies are starting to creep back in, and they might notice a new one or something like that, and they have to eliminate it. Start and stop drills are really good as a thing to do every once in a while to just make sure that you're staying on top of your efficiency, and then periodically, once every month or every 2 months, do another transcription just to make sure. The steps involved in this one are much simpler. So number one, prepare a speech rework. And I would say that 1 ARs, 2 ARs, 2 ARs are the best, again, for this drill. What? 1 ARs, 2 ARs, 2 ARs. But it's also useful for 2 ACs on the case. It's also useful for 2 NCs and 1 NRs. It can be more useful for those than transcription. The reason that those are less fun for transcription is because a lot of your speech is just reading cards. So it's like, why do you want to transcribe cards? That's not very much fun. It's not very useful. Do not over-prepare the speech, so you don't want to be reading. You want to be in a similar prep time position as you would be when you are in an actual debate. Number two is identify common inefficiencies, and in particular the ones you want to work on. I found that you can really only focus on one thing during these drills, maybe two, if they're simple. But it's really difficult for the listener to think of multiple things at the same time. They kind of need to clue in on one thing. So you say probably 15 times every speech, they can think about that. You say which means that 10, 15, 20, 30, 50 times every speech, they can clue in on that. But they probably can't do which means that, literally, probably, at the point which, solve back. They probably can't do all of those at the same time. And then obviously communicate that list to the person who's working with it. Number three is deliver the speech and then stop every time you mess up, every time you slip up, every time you use whatever you're trying to fix. So the person you're working with, the instructor or the peer, should verbally stop you. So you're like going along, blah, 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 which means that, stop! You said which means that, oh! And then start over. There are two variations to just a verbal thing that I've played around with in the past. One of which is water guns. This is obviously, hopefully, best if you're not using a computer. You're just giving a speech off of flow. And if you're outside. The other one is just crumpling up paper and throwing it at the person, or like a Nerf ball or something like that. I looked into this a little bit, and I think the reason that these are effective more than just the verbal telling them to stop is that they train you that something bad will happen to you if you do what you're trying not to do. And so it sort of raises the stakes of the activity. I don't really do these that much anymore. I'll do the throwing stuff thing occasionally, but if you have formed a very bad kind of solidified habit where you just can't seem to stop yourself from saying one of these things or from structuring things a certain way, I would experiment with these because I do think that there's some psychological reason that they might be slightly better than, but whatever. Number 4 is restart after every slip up. So I already said that. Restart the speech. And your goal is to complete a whole speech without messing up, without using an inefficiency, whatever it is that you're targeting, without using the targeted mistake. But sometimes this is too hard. So like you could be at it for hours, and by that point you're just tired and you can't think anymore, and so it's not very useful. So if you struggle to do that, there are 2 variations. You can do mini speeches, so just isolate a sub part of the debate, a subcomponent of the debate, of the speech. And your goal is to deliver that 1 minute or whatever, that 2 minutes. If you're real bad, just start with 30 seconds without using any of the inefficiencies that you're targeting. So just keep starting the mini speech. And so it's going to take you 20 minutes to get through 1 minute of stuff. If you have to keep restarting, then I would suggest just the 1 minute, not the 5 minutes. The second thing is sectional restarts. So divide the speech into sections, and once you get through one section, you can kind of say, all right, I got that one. And then if you mess up in the next section, you just restart that section. That can accelerate this. It's like video games when you can like get to a certain level and then you have to play the previous level. Your goal eventually is to be able to get through these without messing up for a whole speech in like 1 or 2 attempts. But if you start doing this and you're like, wow, that's hard. I agree, it is hard. And it's okay to start smaller. And then number 5, the last thing, is repeat the drill for other inefficiencies. Because you can usually only work on 1 or 2 when you do this stop-start drill, it's important to do different ones and to follow up. The worst thing that you can do is you can eliminate one inefficient language choice or inefficient sentence structure and just replace it with a different one. Because that would appeal to you because you're like, oh, I can fix this one, but I can still give myself all that thinking time. Sounds good to me. No, not good to you. So repeat this drill for other inefficiencies and kind of stay on top of whatever the ones are that you have identified as the most common problem. Questions about speaking efficiently? Yes?
Say you follow through with these inefficiency drills and
yes.
You shave off like that person who ended up with 42 seconds of content in his speech as opposed to the 5 minutes. How would you suggest we go from there? Do you want us to like practice speaking drills, so to speak, and like elaborate more on the content?
More content, yeah. Because the goal of all of this is so that you have more time to talk about content. So if you're affirmative, you're giving the 1AR, you've got 8 minutes worth of evidence from the 1AC. You've got probably 5 minutes worth of evidence from the 2AC plus 3 minutes of analytical arguments.
Yeah.
Plus you've got 2 cross-exes where you are asking questions. You've got 2 cross-exes where you are answering questions. That's a ton of stuff that has happened in the debate. The negative has also read, goodness, a ton of evidence at that point in the debate. So you shouldn't have any trouble coming up with all the content in the world. The problem is you've gotten used to, if you're inefficient, not having to say very much, not having time to say very much, and so you haven't learned all of the depth that you can develop. And that's the reason that we want to do this, is so that you can talk more about the evidence that you've read and the quality of the evidence, the arguments in the evidence, and the differences between their evidence and your evidence, the differences between their impacts and your impacts, the differences between the way that they have explained an argument and the way that you have explained an argument. It dramatically, for almost everyone that I've ever done this with a few exceptions of people who just kind of had it already, just changes the way you think about speeches. So it's like if those of you who can remember, when you first started debate, you were probably slow. You just sort of spoke at a conversational speed, and then you tried to ramp it up a little bit. And at some point, you started to speak you got the debate speaking and you got a lot faster, you're like, whoa, I can read like 3 off and still have time for the case. This is so crazy. I can like read blocks to everything in the 2AC. This is a similar, but I think even more profound experience for many people, because you have kind of settled on, all right, I need to get faster. I remember when I got fast, I had more time, so I need to just keep getting faster. And that's not the solution. Once you get to a certain pace, you really getting a little bit faster doesn't make that big of a difference. Getting more efficient makes the speech incredibly long. And for many of you, the struggle will be, goodness, what do I say? I've never had to debate this deep ever. And that's great. That's what you should be learning. That's why we do it. So good question. More content, more distinctions, evidence comparison, impact comparison, warrant comparison, not just claims. Other question? Yes?
You mentioned earlier, and this is a very, very specific instance, that it wouldn't be good to say something, to specifically say, in the status quo, this isn't happening. Do you really think that there are no instances in which, in order to, like, stylistically, for your judge, make a distinction between what's happening now versus what would happen if the plan were passed?
Oh, surely, yeah.
What's going on?
Yeah, but that's thoughtfully using the phrase, not unthinkingly using it. A lot of people use that term to describe everything. So it won't pass in the status quo. The link won't be triggered in the status quo. The impact won't happen in the status quo. The case won't be solved in the status quo. The counter doesn't solve the status quo, whatever. Yes, but if you were saying, like, there's a distinction in the status quo, these votes are for immigration reform, the plan passes, votes are against immigration reform. Certainly to make a connection, I would use that language, yes. It's the unthinking part that you criticize. Other questions? That was a good one. Yes?
Like, I know you said not to use like the entirety of, but kind of along the lines of that question, like, if they really do like concede the entirety of like an off case, or like,
you've already been programmed. Do you ever talk to anyone like that? Have you ever eaten the entirety of the buffet? They didn't concede the entire, like, they just didn't go to the dissat?
Yeah.
They just say what the dissat says. Yeah, there's never a reason to say the entirety of, because it's just hyperbole. You could, instead of saying the entirety of, you could say, if let's say they have 2 advantages or whatever, you could say the dissat outweighs advantage 1, and the dissat outweighs advantage 2, and then in the time that you spent hyperbolically talking about how they conceded the entirety of everything that you've ever said and they're never going to win, you could have actually just made the arguments that contribute to the debate. But yes, you've been programmed. Yes.
I know you were saying, like, don't use that means that. What I'm struggling with is thinking about, like, 2NR framing the debate, and like, if you make an argument and you want to explain to the judge what that means for the rest of the debate, how do you do that efficiently? Like,
give me an example. Our dissat is really big. That means we win. How about we win? Our dissat is really big.
Because I'm just thinking, like, when connecting to the judge, like telling them specifically, like, or trying to explain, like, here's what I think this means if this happens.
Just say that. The dissat is really big. That's important. We win a big dissat, we win. Yeah. Simple, straightforward. Just say what you mean. Because a lot of times, in your zeal to say, and you have the right instinct, you should explain, you should impact your arguments not only in terms of the impact, like the debate impact, but also the impact on the debate, the impact in terms of whether you win or lose the debate. But a lot of times, the thing he did too, like the entirety of the concession, and that means at that point, blah, 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 a lot of that just kind of hides the fact that you didn't really say anything. So you like kind of gave the illusion that you communicated to the judge why you won the debate, but you didn't really say very much. So just figure out what you want to say, and then just say the thing that you want to say. You don't need to cover it up, basically. Other questions? Nothing? Really? I said a lot of stuff here. You don't have any questions about any other phrasings or how to do these drills? I just nailed it?
Yeah.
You don't have any questions about how to do this stuff? I was sure that someone was going to be like, I don't get it.
So you were talking about mixing a meta clash with directly responding to an argument. What discretion would you use for whichever one?
Once you are excellent at explicitly clashing, so once you are an excellent signposter that is doing so extremely efficiently, then I would encourage you to experiment with embedded clash. And I would experiment with embedded clash in particular places. So the 2AC on the case is a really good place. The 1AR can do it sometimes. The 2NC on the case can be good. But I would play around with it in different places, and I would assess, honestly, whether I was being more efficient or less efficient by doing it. And the classic trade-off is, yes, I can save a few words when I don't signpost, but if the judge is confused, then it's not worth those few words. And that's kind of the whole thing about efficiency, is the purpose of efficiency is not just to achieve fewest words possible, it's to communicate the most number of arguments possible. And so if you feel like, all right, I got explicit clash, I got signposting, I got all that, I'm good at that, and I do it efficiently, next step is experiment with embedded clash. It works better for some people than others.
Can you explicitly point to an argument without saying they say?
You could, for sure. So, I mean, you can use the language of their evidence. So you could say, like, no drilling as like a label for that argument. Yes, drilling is inevitable, blah, 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 blah. Here's the distinction or evidence, blah, 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 blah. But yes, you can play around with different ways to explicitly signpost. But in my experience, the vast majority of high school students that attempt embedded clash fail miserably, and it ends up being worse, not better. But I do encourage you to experiment with it, especially in particular places. 2 essays on the case are probably the best place to do it. Good question. Next question. Yes?
One issue I have in prep for the 2AR is prepping like efficiently and like the context that we like want to make. How can we like, I guess, kind of still be able to like prep the 2NR, but as well as like the content of the debate?
Prep the 2NR as well as the content of the debate. What do you mean?
Or like, I guess like create answers to like the 2NR argument and still like.
Still have time to do like
the
meta
content,
level,
like,
the framing and stuff. I mean, part of that is just understanding the trajectory of the debate as it happens. So the better you get, the better you can kind of think along with the debate as it evolves. You have some sense already, if they do this, here's what my 2AR is going to look like. If they do this, here's what my 2AR is going to look like. If they do this, this is what my 2AR is going to look like. And so you have some appreciation for those comparisons. And eventually those comparisons just become very similar. It's like there's this kind of debate, this kind of debate, this kind of debate. There's like 10 kinds of 2ARs maybe. But specifically, you have to start thinking about that, and I would explicitly prep that first. I would prep the nexus issue, I would prep my overview explanation where I explain what voting affirmative means, what voting negative means, why voting affirmative is better than voting negative. And if I didn't get to a couple of line-by-line arguments in my prepping, I would just trust that I can do it live in the 2AR. But I would not trust that I could do live the like overview part, because I think that's much harder and it requires distilling arguments from different flows, kind of contextualizing, and clearly communicating. So I would prioritize prepping that and then let the line by line happen.
Okay.
Good question. Nothing?
Pretty solid.
Go for it.
Once you've eliminated efficiencies, if you still need time to like think, is it always better to just slow down?
Slow down, yep. The miracle of efficiency is that you can communicate the same number of arguments while going slower than your opponents. And judges will love that. Even judges that are fine with people who go fast. Like, you're a little bit slower. That means I can hear all of your words. You less look like you're about to pass out. You're not spitting all over the place. You're not sweating profusely. You can connect with me more. Like, everyone loves that.
I have a second related question. Have
Yes.
you found that people who tried to slow down stopped being as inefficient, even if they didn't do the efficiency goals
Yes,
beforehand?
because you've allowed your brain to catch up. Obviously, to stop inefficiency, so if I wanted to teach you just like stop being inefficient, my real suggestion is just slow the heck down and stop trying to go faster than you can think. But obviously no one would listen to me if I told you that, even if I tried. So, I get that you want to be fast and you want to make all of the arguments that you can. Slowing down, as he said, is actually very effective. So if you are one of the people that is just like, whew, you do all of these things, when I just describe this and you're like, oh goodness, I don't know what I'm going to say in debates anymore, then yes, just slow down for a while. And you can always build back up. But the best debaters are, the great debaters, Arsh and Markov and people like that, are not only very fast, but they don't really say very many things that are wasteful. And so that is your goal. That's like the perfect combination. So that also means that you can slow down and you can make connections that other people can't make because they're just trying to cover. Like
How do you transcribe stutters?
just like put whatever you said. So if you're like, that's put or like that's all hegemony, that hegemony, just like that whatever. It's awesome. I just love I thought about just like showing some of these transcripts, but I don't want to make fun of it. But it's rampant. It's a disease, and your job is to get rid of the disease. Okay? All right. You all can take off.